What if the secret to a joyful life after 60 wasn't about doing more, but letting go of what no longer serves you? You see, most of us were raised with this quiet belief that success means always adding more work, more responsibilities, more savings, more patience. But somewhere along the way, we forget that peace doesn't come from having more. It comes from carrying less. In this video, I'm going to walk with you through 9 things you might consider letting go of after 60, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you deserve a life that feels lighter, freer, and more deeply yours. These lessons aren't just theories. They're truths gathered from years of listening to people just like you, men and women in their 60s, 70s, even 90s, who've taught me what it really means to live well, right now. I still remember Clara, a widow in her mid-70s, who once told me this during a quiet afternoon chat. I spent my whole life holding on to stuff, to guilt, to other people's expectations. But once I started letting go, I finally felt like myself again. That one sentence stayed with me. Maybe it will stay with you too. So today, we're not going to add anything to your to-do list. We're going to subtract, with care, with kindness, and with the intention of making room for what truly matters. Let's take that first gentle step together. Let me tell you about Jim, a 68-year-old retired engineer who spent decades building a solid life, paid off his home, raised 2 wonderful daughters, and tucked away over $2 million in retirement accounts. On paper, he had everything he needed. But every time his wife suggested taking a cruise to Alaska, upgrading their old couch, or even trying the new Italian restaurant in town, Jim would freeze. What if something happens, he'd say. What if we need that money later? Jim wasn't being selfish or controlling. He was scared. For so long, saving had been his way of protecting his family. It was how he showed love, how he prepared for the unknown. But what happens when the unknown becomes now? When you've already crossed into that later, you spent your whole life preparing for. Saving out of fear is like carrying an umbrella on a sunny day, just in case it rains. But if you never open your arms to the sun, you miss the warmth that's right here today. The truth is, after 60, the purpose of your money shifts. It's no longer just a safety net. It's a tool for joy, for connection, for living well in the time you still have. That cruise your partner keeps dreaming of? It's not a splurge. It's a memory waiting to be made. That dinner with old friends? That's not wasteful. It's nourishment for your soul. If your essential needs are met, then it's time to ask not just, what if I run out, but what is worth spending on while I still can? Jim eventually took that trip, and when he came home, he didn't talk about the money. He talked about the whales they saw, the laughter over breakfast, and how alive he felt, maybe for the first time in years. So, what's one thing you've been afraid to enjoy? One moment you've delayed because of the what ifs? It might be time to shift the question, not what might go wrong, but what might you miss if you keep waiting? And speaking of what really matters, let's talk next about how to stop spending on things that bring you nothing but clutter. A few years ago, I met a lovely woman named Carol, early 70s, always smiling, always generous. She told me that every holiday season, she spent hundreds of dollars on gifts. Fancy wrapping paper, things on sale she thought others might like, even gadgets she didn't quite understand, but bought just in case. One day she admitted, with a little laugh and a little sadness, half of it ends up in a drawer, even mine. Then she told me about a moment that stayed with her, a $600 flight she took last minute to surprise her sister for her birthday. They sat on the porch, drank coffee, watched old movies, and talked about everything and nothing. That weekend, she said, was worth every penny. I would have paid double. That's the difference between spending and spending well. After 60, your money isn't just about managing bills. It's about aligning with what truly brings you joy. Too often, we spend out of habit or guilt, on clothes we never wear, on home gadgets we don't use, or on things that were supposed to make us feel something, but somehow didn't. The truth is, joy doesn't come from a sale tag or a shopping bag. It comes from experiences that nourish the heart, not the closet. So the next time you're about to buy something, pause and ask yourself, does this spark real joy? Does it support the life I want to live now? Or is it just filling space? Let go of spending that feels like obligation. Invest instead in the moments that matter, the lunch with a friend, the class you've always wanted to take, the memory you've yet to make. Because when you choose joy, you choose a life that's rich in the ways that count. And speaking of value, let's now explore one of the biggest shifts you can make for a meaningful retirement. Stop trading your precious time for money. I once sat across the table from a man named George. He was 66, silver-haired and sharp-minded, and had worked as an accountant for over 40 years. Every morning, he still woke up at 6:30, dressed in a crisp shirt, and logged in to help his old firm, despite being officially retired. I asked him why. He smiled, paused, and said, "I guess I don't know what I'd do if I stopped." That response stuck with me, because so many of us, especially after 60, are still trading hours for paychecks, not because we love it, but because it's what we've always done. For decades, we built our lives around earning. It gave us purpose, structure, identity. But now, in this next chapter, that old equation might no longer serve us. Here's the gentle truth. Time is your most precious currency now. Every hour spent doing something that drains you, just to earn a bit more, is an hour you can't get back. If your work still brings joy, meaning, and connection, by all means, keep going. But if you're just clocking in because stopping feels scary, maybe it's time to ask, what are you really working for? One woman I spoke with, named June, was a retired teacher. She kept tutoring kids part-time, not for the money, but because it made her heart light up. That's the difference. Purpose fuels you. Obligation wears you down. So here's the shift. Stop measuring your days by what you earn and start measuring them by how they make you feel. Let your time be invested in what brings you meaning, not just money. Your value doesn't retire when you do. And once you reclaim your time, what comes next is just as powerful. Let's talk about that dream trip, that letter unwritten, that class you've been putting off for someday. Because that someday? It's now. Elaine was 70 when she finally stood on the cliffs of the Grand Canyon, hand in hand with her sister, both of them misty-eyed as the wind brushed their cheeks. She had talked about that trip for over a decade, always saying, maybe next year, always putting it off because something else felt more urgent. Doctor's appointments, a leaky roof, the holidays, the grandkids' school schedule. But when her sister fell ill briefly one winter, it shook her. That was the moment she realized, if not now, when? And that's a quiet truth so many of us carry. We delay joy. We save the good china for guests who never come. We leave the piano untouched. We wait to paint, to travel, to call an old friend. But life after 60 isn't a waiting room. It's the main event. Let me ask you something gently. What have you been postponing? Not because it's impossible, but because it never felt like the right time. A trip, a hobby, a day with someone you miss? The truth is, joy doesn't need perfect conditions. It just needs permission. Your permission. One couple I knew always dreamed of dancing in the kitchen again, but their record player sat dusty in a corner for years. One day, on a quiet Sunday, the husband plugged it in and played their wedding song, No fancy occasion. Just love. Just now. And that moment, they told me, meant more than any anniversary dinner ever had. So today, give yourself the gift of presence. Don't wait for perfect. Joy hides in the ordinary. If we stop postponing it, and once you step into that joy, you'll notice something else shift. Because the more joy you let in, the more health and energy you'll feel flowing back. And that brings us to something we too often neglect, your health. Let's talk about it. Let's talk. I once asked a woman named Rose, 71 years old and sharp as a tack, if you could have $20 million but feel tired, stiff, and in pain every day, or just enough to live comfortably, but wake up with energy and ease, what would you choose? She didn't even blink. Oh, give me the health, she said. You can't spend money if you're stuck in bed. And that's the quiet truth most people don't say out loud. We work for decades to build our nest egg, to prepare for retirement, to finally have the time to enjoy life. And then, sometimes, without even realizing it, we forget to take care of the very thing that lets us live, our health. You don't need to train for a marathon. You don't need to switch to some extreme diet. But you do need to pay attention. Because the real question after 60 isn't, how many years do I have left? It's, how many good years do I have left? The kind where you can walk through the farmer's market without getting winded, where you can garden, play with your grandkids, or travel without worrying about pain or fatigue. I once met a man named Harold. He was 74 and used a cane, not because of a serious injury, but because of years of slowly letting his body weaken. One day, his doctor suggested gentle chair yoga. He laughed at first, thought it was silly, but his daughter convinced him to try. A few weeks in, he could bend more easily, sleep better, and, his favorite, he no longer needed help getting up from his favorite recliner. He told me with tears in his eyes, I didn't realize how much I missed feeling like myself. That's the gift of movement. It's not about appearance. It's about access to freedom, to presence, to joy. So start small. Walk around the block while the sun sets. Stretch your arms overhead when you wake up. Replace one processed snack with a piece of fruit. Take your vitamins. Drink more water. Maybe try a senior fitness class at your local community center, even if it's just once a week. Even light strength training, done safely, can strengthen your balance, reduce your fall risk, and increase your confidence. And yes, call your doctor. Schedule the appointment you've been putting off. Your future self will thank you. Because here's something we forget. When you feel better physically, you show up more fully emotionally. You laugh longer. You stay out later. You feel braver to try new things, to go new places. And little by little, you remember what it means to feel alive. Not just existing, but living. And once your body feels strong again, there's a natural shift that happens in the mind. You start caring less about what others think. You stop shaping your life to fit someone else's mold, and you begin living it for you. Let's explore that. Next, I remember a woman named Margaret. She was 67, graceful, thoughtful, and had always played the role of the good daughter, the devoted mother, and the quiet friend. But beneath that gentle smile was a longing she rarely shared. She wanted to paint. Not for show, not for anyone else, just for herself. One day she confessed, I've wanted to take an art class for years, but every time I think about it, I hear this voice in my head saying, what if people laugh? What if they think it's ridiculous at my age? I looked at her and gently asked, and what if you never try? Would that feel any better? She paused, then nodded slowly, because deep down, she knew. So many of us know. After 60, we finally have time, space, and wisdom. And yet, we still carry invisible rules, expectations from parents long gone, coworkers retired, neighbors we no longer see, or even people who never really understood us in the first place. We shape our lives to fit a mold that no longer fits. But here's something quiet and powerful. The older you get, the more permission you have to be exactly who you are. Not who you used to be, not who people expect, just you. And that, my friend, is the most freeing truth of all. I once worked with a man named Henry, 72 years old. All his life he wore brown, beige, gray, safe colors. Then one day, out of the blue, he bought a bright teal jacket. His daughter laughed. His neighbor raised an eyebrow. But Henry? He stood taller. He said, "For once, I wanted to wear something that made me smile." And it did. Why do we wait so long to listen to that quiet voice inside? The one that says, "This brings me joy," or "This isn't for me anymore." At this stage of life, you've earned the right to trust your own instincts, to say no when you're tired, to say yes when your heart lights up, to laugh louder, dress bolder, speak honestly, and live without the need for applause. And I want to remind you, there's no medal for being endlessly accommodating, no reward for always blending in. The truth is, when you stop worrying about what others think, you give others the gift of seeing the real you. And often, that courage inspires them more than perfection ever could. There's a book by a hospice nurse named Bronnie Ware. She spent years with people at the end of their lives, and the most common regret they shared wasn't about money or achievements. It was this: I wish I had lived a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. That line still gives me goosebumps. So if there's something your heart is calling for, a painting class, a solo trip, singing in a local choir, starting a blog, planting wildflowers, just because, listen, the world doesn't need another version of who you were supposed to be. It needs you, fully, freely, beautifully you. And when you finally release the weight of other people's opinions, you begin to reclaim your peace. Which brings us to something just as important: the environment you allow into your mind each day. Because peace is precious, and too often, we trade it away for noise, fear, and headlines. Let's explore that. Next, a few months ago, I visited an old friend named Walter. He's 74, retired, and living in a peaceful little town by the lake. But when I stepped into his living room, the TV was blaring. Another breaking news headline, another crisis, another voice shouting over someone else. And Walter? He looked tired, not physically but mentally, worn down, anxious, distracted. "I keep it on all day," he said, "just to stay informed." I sat down next to him and asked, "And how does it make you feel?" He didn't answer right away. He just sighed. You see, there's a difference between staying informed and being emotionally drained. And many of us, without meaning to, have fallen into the habit of feeding our minds with stress before we even have breakfast. News channels, social media, even radio talk shows, they're designed to keep us hooked. And what keeps us hooked? Fear? Outrage? Suspense? But your peace of mind is not disposable, especially not now. At this stage of life, you deserve calm mornings, quiet reflections, and content that nourishes your spirit, not constantly triggers your nerves. I once suggested a news fast to a client for just 48 hours. Instead of cable news, she listened to music, read a poem each morning, and watched an old comedy show before bed. 2 days later, she said, "I slept better. I felt lighter. I smiled more." It didn't mean she stopped caring about the world. It meant she started caring about herself, too. You don't have to shut everything off forever. Just choose wisely. Maybe you check the headlines once a day. Maybe you pick trusted sources over sensational ones. Maybe you add more uplifting voices to your day. Music, stories, conversations that remind you the world still holds beauty. Because the truth is, every moment you spend consumed by fear is a moment taken away from joy. And you've earned the right to protect your joy fiercely. And speaking of joy, there's one area where fear still tries to sneak in: your financial life. Not just how you spend, but how you avoid. Let's talk about that next. I once asked a woman in her early 70s, if you knew, without a doubt, that this was your last year, what would you do differently? She didn't hesitate. I'd travel to Oregon to see my sister. I'd finally take that painting class. I'd stop worrying about the house being perfect, and I'd tell my children I love them every single day. Then she smiled softly and said, "But I keep putting it off. I always think there's more time." That's what so many of us believe, that there will always be more time. More time to rest, more time to forgive, more time to follow that quiet dream. But here's the tender truth. We don't have forever. We never did. And yet, we live like we do. We delay joy, postpone connection, and tell ourselves someday. Someday, when things calm down, when we retire, when we feel ready. But someday isn't a date on the calendar. And sometimes it never arrives. I met a couple once, Henry and Louise. They had dreamed for years of taking a cross-country road trip in an old camper. Every year they said, next summer. But next summer kept passing. Then one winter, Henry had a minor heart scare, not life-threatening, but enough to shake them. That was the moment they stopped waiting. They packed their bags, hit the road, and 6 months later, they told me it was the best thing they ever did, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because they were finally living instead of planning. And that's what I want for you. To feel the breeze on your face not from a dream, but from an open window on a road you've chosen. To look back and say, I'm so glad I did, not, I wish I had. So if there's a trip you've delayed, a call you've avoided, a letter you keep meaning to write, a story you want to tell, don't wait for the perfect moment. Choose now. Even a small step counts. A single ticket booked, a 5-minute phone call, a simple handwritten note. Because life isn't measured by what we plan, it's measured by what we live. And once you understand that your time is precious, not unlimited, you start choosing differently. You start living with intention, with heart, with presence. And when you do, you'll notice something else. Life feels fuller when it's lived lighter. That brings us to a space we often avoid, our homes and what's inside them. But what if letting go of physical clutter was the next step in making room for more joy? Let's talk about that next. If there's one thing I hope you take from this conversation, it's this. Letting go is not about loss. It's about love. Love for yourself, for the life you still have, and for the peace you truly deserve. Whether it's fear, guilt, clutter, routines, or old beliefs that no longer serve you, each thing you release makes more space for what matters: joy, connection, and freedom. I've met so many people who spent years holding on, not because they needed to, but because they felt they should. And the moment they finally let go of the pressure, the past, the extra stuff, they didn't feel emptier. They felt lighter, more alive, more themselves. So today, I want to ask you gently, what's one thing you're ready to let go of? Not tomorrow, not next year, but today? Maybe it's an object in your home. Maybe it's a fear in your heart. Maybe it's a story you've told yourself for too long. Whatever it is, you're not letting it go to give up. You're letting it go to move forward. And that, my dear friend, is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself at any age. If this message touched something in you, I invite you to share it with someone you love or with a comment below. And if you'd like more gentle reminders like this, don't forget to subscribe. Because aging isn't about slowing down, it's about showing up fully. And the best chapters? They're often the ones we write from right here, right now.